It seems hard to believe, but more than 3 decades have passed since AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, first burst onto the international consciousness. And certainly no city was more impacted than San Francisco. Our guest tonight is Dana Van Gorder, someone who knows all about those years and where we have come since then. Dana, welcome.
Thank you.
You were born and raised in San Francisco, correct?
Sunnyvale, California.
Sunnyvale,
right
California, near enough, near enough. Do you remember hearing the word AIDS for the first time? I
do. In 1981, when the epidemic started, I was working for Supervisor Harry Britt, the openly gay member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors who had been appointed by Mayor Feinstein to replace Harvey Milk, and Cleve Jones came to our office to talk to us about the fact that the first few cases of what would be known as AIDS had been seen by Mark Conan and a couple of other doctors, and really sort of bracing us for what was perhaps about to unfold and encouraging us to take the initial steps to address it. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, subsequently, as many of us do, I can remember, going to meetings in the community and what have you, and having people announce that they had become ill. And it was obviously a very shocking and horrifying time. And of course, in 1981, it was that horrible period when this disease existed, but they couldn't tell you if you had it. They couldn't tell you what it did to you. They couldn't even tell you if the symptoms you had were AIDS or something else, and that took years before there was a test. I've always thought that in many ways those were the worst years of the AIDS epidemic because we all thought we were going to die. Indeed. People had no idea if they had been exposed, and we didn't really have, even a sense of what, behaviors were putting people at risk. I mean, we certainly had a strong hunch that something sexually transmitted was going on and that people needed to protect themselves, but there was certainly not a clue as to what it might actually be. Now, the so-called San Francisco model of AIDS HIV care has been talked about for the last 30 years. And one of those organizations that created that San Francisco model was the one which you head now, Project Inform. Talk to us about the history of Project Inform and how you came to be involved with it. Sure. Well, in those early years of the epidemic, I mean, one of the sort of the good news of what was going on was that so many people sort of rose to the occasion to create organizations to address the sort of myriad of needs that we had. Martin Delaney, who was our founder, had participated in clinical trials at Stanford on hepatitis B drugs, and he felt that that experience really sort of qualified him both to sort of advocate for people with AIDS in the drug discovery process, to make sure that the compounds that were being selected were at least reasonably tolerable, that clinical trials were designed well, and those kinds of things. And so Project Inform and Marty sort of became the first people in the country to really sort of encourage the research community and pharmaceutical companies to try to discover drugs, right. And then to make sure that patients were well represented and cared for. It was fairly controversial. I remember at that time I was writing for The Advocate, the first national LGBT news magazine, and I interviewed Martin Delaney, and I remember thinking as a young journalist, this person has more information and better information than the doctors. Well, that was one of the things that really characterized AIDS activism early on, too. I mean, people felt so threatened and realized that, the government was not responding at any appreciable level. And so if they were going to protect their lives, they really needed to learn everything, possible about the disease and possible treatments and what have you. So, yeah, the activism of Project Inform and many other people was remarkable. A lot of people became scientists overnight. In order to help address this. When you run across young men or women, just young people in general now, for whom those years are not even a memory. I mean, there are people now sexually active all over the world that weren't born when AIDS was here and are becoming HIV positive. When you hear stories about people having unsafe sex or not taking precautions, how does that make you feel as someone who's been in the trenches, actually dug some of the trenches? Right. Well, it's, it's horrifying on one level. Simultaneously, I think people understand that it's still better not to have HIV. You know, it's better not to have to take medications on a daily basis, and there are a lot of implications of this disease, even though it's largely sort of manageable. And at the same time, you know, we do have a real challenge to sort of help people understand, and particular communities understand that this is still something to take very seriously.
Right. How has Project Inform's mission changed?
Well, there were kind of three things that we committed ourselves to early on. One was, you know, the supporting the discovery of effective treatments and a cure, doing a massive amount of work to make sure that as treatments became available, people who wanted to use them knew what they were all about, you know, how to use them, when to use them, what their, you know, problems were. And the third thing was that, you know, as we had treatments available, making sure that public programs would pay for access to health care. And we continue to do those things. We have a very serious focus on sort of reinvigorating the effort to find a cure for HIV, major educational programs, and we're very heavily involved in making sure that Obamacare is well implemented because it is really sort of holds the answer to you know, ending the epidemic.
Right. There's two things I want to talk about. Let's take Obamacare first. You said that holds the, I don't want to put words in your mouth, the seeds, or it has the potential to help end the epidemic. What do you mean by that?
Well, we in 2008, during the last presidential election, we were active in helping to call for a national HIV/AIDS strategy. You know, our problem in HIV right now is that 21% of people with HIV don't know that they have it, and almost 50% are not actively engaged in healthcare to sort of deal with their infection. There is simply not enough sort of public funding available in the programs that are caring for people with HIV today. If we were to suddenly to, you know, get everybody into care and treatment, the dollars would not be there.
Even with Obamacare?
Well, the great promise of Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act is that it will, you know, in fact, guarantee that people have access to health care. We won't have to rely on Congress year after year to sort of appropriate the dollars that we need for HIV programs. And for particular populations, it will, you know, be especially helpful in helping them to enter health care. So it is extremely important that we protect it moving forward.
Right. You said something else, that Project Inform is trying to reinvigorate the drive for a cure. I mean, I remember the first time I heard AIDS in 1981 and moving to San Francisco in the mid-'80s. You couldn't open a newspaper, mainstream or gay, and not hear about what they were trying to do to find a cure or a test or whatnot. It was front page news all the time. And now I hardly read anything about people trying to find a cure. Why?
Well, it's remarkable, isn't it? I think it's because we've become relatively comfortable with the idea that, you know, we now have medications that can sort of prolong life for up to 50 years if a person, you know, takes them early on. And you know, the reality of this virus, I mean, remember, we haven't cured the common cold. So the reality of this virus is that it will be extremely difficult to actually, you know, cure it and eradicate it. Nevertheless, you know, Marty and a group of people several years ago really sort of challenged the research community to return to that effort.
So you do feel like maybe some people in the scientific community and the political community have taken their eye off the ball?
They had, but I think it's been returned to the ball again. The National Institutes of Health has invested heavily in several lines of research now that hold a certain amount of promise. And I think it's reasonable to think that, you know, in another 5 to 10 years, we will have made a significant leap. If we haven't found a cure, we will have identified new sort of technologies that really help people to manage the infection for much longer periods of time.
Do you consider yourself kind of an AIDS veteran?
Well, indeed I am. You know, I was sort of there at the very beginning of it, and, you know, have dedicated my career ever since in one way or another to trying to find a solution to this. I think it's entirely doable. I think we need to have a renewed sense of urgency about it. I think the community needs to really sort of challenge itself to, to take advantage of the opportunity that we have now to end it. But it's definitely doable.
Yeah. Did you ever think there was a time when you just got really down and you thought, I'm not going to live to see this effort through?
No. Fortunately, somehow I've managed to sort of, maintain a certain level of optimism that we would be able to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, the remarkable thing about where we are in the epidemic today is that, these drugs are not only capable of extending life, but if people take them on a regular basis, they are as much as 96% less likely to transmit to other people. This is why, there's kind of a huge refocusing of energy on making sure that people get tested and that they enter care and treatment, because, that is the thing that will eventually really kind of bring this to a grinding halt. So, we're now in the process of building programs that really, do those things aggressively. And I think if, just speaking about San Francisco for a moment, if the gay male community really sort of came together in a major mobilization to, support one another to do those things, we could, in fact, create the first AIDS-free generation in the city.
Something to hope for.
Indeed.
We've been speaking with Dana Van Gorder about his work and the work of Project Inform. I'm David Perry. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week on 10%.